皆さんこんにちは。
こんにちは。
トロント留学センターのケッペイと
留学ワールドのルークです。
ルークさんについての説明やトロントの魅力については前回の動画で紹介させていただきましたので、まだご覧になっていない方はこちらをご覧ください。それでは今回はルークさんがネイティブスピーカーということで英語学習についてのコツを教えていただきたいと思います。ではまずルークさんは英語学習においてトロント留学を非常にお勧めされていると思うんですけれども、その理由をお聞かせいただいてもいいですか？
はい、もちろんです。So in the previous video, I mentioned that Toronto is the world's #1 most multicultural city. So if you learn English here, you can not only learn Canadian English, but you can get the opportunity to speak with a vast number of people from around the world. And I think this is kind of important because different people have different styles of English, so you can gather this kind of experience here in Toronto. Another really important point that I want to emphasize is that many people think that Canadian English is really 聞き取りやすい。なんか言われますよね。
そうですね。カナディアンの方の英語っていうのはすごく聞き取りやすい。実際言われていることでもありますし、僕自身もそのように感じています。それってもしかして何か理由があるんですかね？
そうですね。まずそう言われるとすごく嬉しいです。First of all, I want to talk about the American and British accent. So, starting with America, American accent tends to be located further back and lower. So, for example, like it'll sound like this right now, like a bit more in your throat and a bit more like at the back of your throat. But if you have a British accent, you're going to find it's closer to the front of your mouth, straightforward, and a bit higher up, maybe in your nose or something like that. But Canadian English tends to be exactly in the middle of your mouth. It's a little bit high and toward the center. So actually this has been studied, and Canadian English is probably the most neutral English accent that exists. So I think that's why it's so easy to understand. And actually I think that the Canadian accent is pretty close to Japanese. Japanese is also a little bit in the center, and it's a bit high up and quite clear.
アメリカ英語は結構口の奥から発音していて、イギリス英語だとちょっと手前から、カナディアンの方が話す英語は中間の位置から発されていて、すごく日本人の方からしても分かりやすくて発音しやすい英語という風になっているんですね。はい、すごく興味深い話をいただきました。
よかったです。
それでは次に参ります。次はよくある悩みだと思うんですけれども、僕自身もそうですし、多分視聴者の方々もそう思われている方多いんじゃないかなというふうに思います。日本人の方々は英語に対してすごく苦手意識を持っていると思うんですね。特にスピーキングの時などはもう本当に何をしたらいいかわからないというふうな方も多いんじゃないかなというふうに思います。なので今回はネイティブスピーカーであるルークさんから何かアドバイスをいただけるといいかなというふうに思います。ルークさん、なんで日本人は英語に対して苦手意識を持っていると思いますか？
いい質問ですね。Language acquisition is different compared to language learning. So language learning emphasizes using textbooks, basically focusing on grammar in order to build your vocabulary and put that together into sentences. This is what you have been taught. If you want to learn English, you need to formally study. This will help you become a perfect speaker of the language. But I agree that language learning is very important. Personally, I think you have to build your foundation of a language before you can begin to really use it as a performance tool. But when we are talking about communication, which is performance, I think that you need to let go of the training wheels on your bicycle, and you need to kind of realize that if you want to be better at speaking, you need to practice speaking. You cannot gain experience speaking, or you cannot really help yourself become a better speaker by studying in a textbook. Does that make sense? So it's actually quite obvious. Another really important point that is taught about in language acquisition is that the way you learn a language is more similar to the way you learn your first language. So if you want to speak better, speaking is connected to listening. So actually it does help to listen to English a lot more than you think. A lot of schools emphasize, speaking. Our students speak a lot of English, but actually the research shows that listening is all you need in order to become a better speaker. In particular, you need to hear a phrase or a sentence or a word 40 times and understand the meaning in order to acquire or get the language. And then after about 40 times, you will spontaneously be able to use it even though you had never used it before. And I think maybe you experienced this before, right? Where you're speaking and suddenly you use a word for the first time, or you use an expression like, do you mind if I sit here? You use it without thinking, without preparing, without practicing. It just comes out of your mouth, and that's because you've heard it many times. So for those of you who are in Japan, this is kind of inspiration or a hope for you, because there are things like Netflix and YouTube and other places where you can find native English speakers speaking English naturally. And I think that when you want to have communication, when you want to speak, it's probably going to be natural speech. So in this way, actually, it's important to mention to be careful about two things. One, unnatural English. For example, TED Talk. TED Talk is often used to learn English, but it's not natural everyday conversation, right? It's presentation and it's very kind of katai kotoba, and it's interesting. I love TED, but it might not be the best way to learn natural English, little expressions, things like that. The other point is to make sure that it's not too difficult. Basically, as I said before, you need to hear the word 40 times, but also understand the meaning. So the brain is very interesting. It can recognize patterns and recognize meanings even though it's the first time we hear the word, right? When you're a baby, you hear many words you don't know, but you understand the meaning because of the situation, and that's how you can acquire your English language as well. So you can hear sentences and kind of pick it up organically. But if it's too difficult and there's so many new words and phrases, then it's going to be very difficult, or it's going to take a really long time, and probably you're going to get really tired trying to understand it.
話にもありましたように、それ自体を否定するわけじゃないんですけども、TED トークとかってすごく難しいと思うんですよ。すぐ面白くないしやめちゃうと思うんですけれども、もっと簡単なレベルから、音声を聞くだけでもいいです。Netflix でもいいですし、それも難しいよという場合にはもっともっと簡単なレベルから、自分の趣味のレベルから挑戦していけばいいかなというふうに思います。最近だと個人向けに生の英語のコンテンツも非常に YouTube 上でも増えていますし、実際トロント留学センターでも発信していますので、そういったところから自分のレベルに合ったリアルな英会話表現っていうのを学んでいくのもすごくいいことかもしれませんね。
そうですね。And another point that I want to mention about learning English, and the reason why Japanese people might not have a lot of confidence, is actually related to what we talked about in the previous video. So in Japan, Japanese people are taught to be Japanese and to follow the way of society. So everyone kind of becomes really similar, and Japanese people are not encouraged to have their own strong opinions. Even when you're in Japan, whether you're Japanese or an international person, there is an expectation to be Japanese, basically. Last time we talked about closed flower, which is related to this. So I think that Japanese people, when they learn English, they have a hard time letting go of their Japaneseness, because a language is not just words, it's also the key to the culture. So I think that language is more like a dance. Before I mentioned it's a performance, so it's this kind of concept. When you speak English, you're going to feel like a new person in a way. You are still you, but you are actions, your body, the words that you use, and the ideas behind those words are also going to be different. That's how I feel when I speak Japanese. I'm still Luke, but I'm kind of reborn as a new Luke with some Japanese aji. Do you feel that way as well?
僕自身もやっぱり特に初めはそれを意識していましたね。日本語と英語のキャラクターってどうしても多分違うと思うんですよね。日本語にはある表現でも英語にはない表現もあったり、英語にはあるけれども日本語にはない表現っていうのもやっぱり言語なので存在すると思います。それぞれの、言語のキャラクターを意識してもう一人の自分を作るではないですけれども、多少意識する必要はあるかもしれませんね。
そうですね、言った通り日本語ではあるんですけど英語ではない言葉とかその反対もそうですし、辞書に正式にあるけど言わない。例えば懐かしいは英語で言わない、そのままで言わない。お疲れ様ですとか言うんですけど英語ではそれは文化の違い。言語を学ぶときにそれはすごく面白いところだと思いますけどね。
今ルークさんがおっしゃったその懐かしいっていうのは多分日本人の方の懐かしいは形容詞にノスタルジックという風になると思うんですけど、そうじゃなくて例えば It remind me of なんたかってことですよね。
とか That takes me back とか、When you learn English or another language, I really want you to have fun and enjoy the process of inventing yourself or reinventing yourself as a new person. So open your mind, open your heart, and look and feel the situation around the words and feel the culture behind the language.
それでは今ルークさんにおっしゃっていただいたそのもう一人のキャラクターを作り上げるではないですけれども、そういったことを日本にいながらでも実践できるような練習方法ありますか？
あります。結構シャドウイングやってる人がいっぱいいると思うんですけど、シャドウイングは言葉だけじゃなくてそのアクション、表情とか体の動き方、それを全てを見ながらシャドウイングすればいいと思います。デモンストレーションしましょうか？
いいですか？
いいですよ。
それでは実際にやってみましょう。Hey Luke, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing great, man. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Sweet.